This is a homily for the 14th Sunday in Ordinary Time. The first reading is from the prophet Ezekiel chapter 2 verses 2 to 5. The Gospel for this Sunday comes from the Gospel of St. Mark chapter 6 verses 1 to 6. Today's Gospel is taken from the beginning of chapter 6, and we are still with Jesus and his disciples in the Galilee region. Jesus was born in Bethlehem, but he grew up in Nazareth in Galilee. Nazareth is located about 25 kilometers to the west of the southernmost tip of the Sea of Galilee. He was known as Jesus of Nazareth. The Gospels tell us that when he was crucified, the charge against him was attached to the cross. According to John's Gospel, the inscription read, in Hebrew, Greek, and Latin, Jesus the Nazarene, the King of the Jews. So what do we know about Nazareth at the time of Jesus? Nazareth is not mentioned once in the whole of the Old Testament. Although the Jewish historian Josephus mentions many towns in Galilee, he doesn't mention Nazareth once, and he was writing at the same time that the Gospels were being written. Nor is Nazareth mentioned in rabbinic literature, such as the Talmud, which is a commentary on the Mishnah. Bagil Pixner, a Benedictine monk of the Dormition Abbey in Jerusalem and a lecturer in archaeology, says that excavations during recent decades have shown that the population of Nazareth at the time of Jesus could hardly have numbered more than 120 to 150 people. All of that goes to say that, from the Jewish point of view, nobody of any importance ever lived there, and nothing of any significance ever happened there. John's Gospel tells us that when Jesus had called Philip, one of the first things that Philip did was to find Nathanael. He tells him, "We have found him of whom Moses and the law and the prophets wrote, Jesus, son of Joseph, from Nazareth." To which Philip replies, "From Nazareth? Can anything good come from Nazareth?" St. Paul's words addressed to the Corinthians are certainly true about Nazareth. God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. God chose the common and contemptible, indeed, things that count for nothing. New Testament scholar Brendan Byrne writes this: "The full meaning of the Incarnation is not only that the Son of God became a human being, but that he took human form in a town as ordinary and insignificant and out of the way as Nazareth." Sepphoris was the capital of Galilee until about 20 AD, and Herod Antipas lived there until he relocated the capital to Tiberias, a city that he founded on the western coast of the Sea of Galilee. Sepphoris is located about 6 kilometers to the northwest of Nazareth, but it is never mentioned in the New Testament. In 4 BC, Judah, the son of Hezekiah, led the people of Sepphoris in a revolt against Rome. The Romans retaliated swiftly, sacking the city and reducing it to ashes. Herod Antipas, who became Tetrarch of Galilee following the death of his father in 4 BC, immediately set to work rebuilding Sepphoris. He employed craftsmen from villages all over Galilee. And although the New Testament is silent on the matter, it is quite possible that both Joseph and Jesus worked on the reconstruction of the city. It was, after all, only about an hour's walk from Nazareth. It's interesting to note that as far as we know, Jesus' Galilean ministry was restricted to villages and towns such as Nazareth, Capernaum, Cana, Nain and Chorazin, all circled in red on the map that you can see. The cities of Sepphoris and Tiberias, shown on this Google Earth photo, are notable by their absence. The modern city of Nazareth has a population of over 80,000. The Basilica of the Annunciation dominates Nazareth today. It is built over the traditional site of the cave, which formed part of the house where Mary lived. In 370 AD, the anonymous pilgrim of Piacenza visited a church built over the house of the Virgin. The current basilica on this site was dedicated in 1968. We know that when Jesus began his public ministry, he moved from Nazareth to Capernaum, and according to the Gospel of Luke, he was about 30 years old. Matthew's Gospel refers to Capernaum as his own city. In today's Gospel, Jesus, accompanied by his disciples, returns to Nazareth. The Greek text uses the word patris, which means literally fatherland, and hence native town. With the coming of the Sabbath, he began teaching in the synagogue. At the time of Jesus, any Jewish layman could address a synagogue meeting if he was invited to do so by the synagogue officials. So the fact that Jesus was called upon was not at all unusual. This chapel in Nazareth is known as the synagogue. It was built on the site identified in the 6th century as the synagogue of today's Gospel. It has been in the pastoral care of the Melkites since 1771. As Jesus began teaching, the people were astonished when they heard him. Keep in mind that Nazareth was a very small village, and all the people listening to Jesus would have known him well, or at least they thought they knew him well. They ask, "Where did the man get all this? What is this wisdom that has been granted him, and such works of power as are worked by his hands? Is not this the carpenter, the son of Mary, the brother of James and Joseph and Jude and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us?" Let's pause there for a moment to ask about Jesus' family. We met them earlier in chapter 3, and in today's Gospel his mother and brothers, but not his sisters, are named. Who are they? Did Mary and Joseph have other children following the birth of Jesus? New Testament scholar Diane Bergant has this to say: "For some, the virginity of Mary is not an important issue, and they interpret the Greek words in a narrow sense, maintaining that Mary and Joseph had other children. Those who believe in Mary's virginity interpret the Greek to include cousins as well as siblings, an understanding of kinship that is acceptable in many cultures. One's interpretation really depends on theological beliefs that are beyond the evidence in this passage." Bagil Pixner offers this summary of the question. "In the Protestant churches, it is generally considered that they were Jesus' own younger brothers and sisters. The Catholic Church favours the opinion of Jerome, that they were, in fact, his cousins. In the East, it is customary to regard all extended family relations as brothers and sisters. The oldest interpretation, which is to be found with the early fathers, still lives on in the Oriental churches, including the Greek Orthodox. According to this tradition, Joseph was a widower when he took Mary to be his wife. his first wife bore him 4 sons and 2 daughters. Mary had only 1 son of her own, but raised all of them, and was greatly esteemed by all as their mother. So we come back to Burgant's conclusion that how we interpret the words brothers and sisters in this gospel text depends upon theological beliefs that go beyond any evidence that we have in this text. Note that they call Jesus a carpenter. The Greek word that Mark uses is tekton. The word tekton means more than just a carpenter. It refers to anyone who works with his hands in hard material, stone, wood, metal, horn, or ivory. It can be translated into English by words such as carpenter, woodworker, artisan, builder, handyman, or contractor. New Testament scholar John Mayer offers this explanation. It was a calling involving a broad range of skills and tools. Indeed, archaeology, as well as written sources, tell us that a large number of tools were used in ancient woodworking. Thus, while Jesus was, in one sense, a common Palestinian workman, he plied a trade that involved, for the ancient world, a fair level of technical skill. It also involved no little sweat and muscle power. The airy weakling often presented to us in pious paintings and Hollywood movies would hardly have survived the rigours of being Nazareth's tekton from his youth to his early 30s. William Barclay adds this. Now, tekton does mean a worker in wood, but it means more than merely a joiner. It means a craftsman. In Homer, the tekton is said to build ships and houses and temples. It's interesting to note that Celsus, a 2nd century opponent of Christianity, derided it for having a labourer as its founder. By calling him a tekton, the folk of Nazareth are saying that he's not a priest or a scribe. He hasn't received any formal training in the scriptures. So they're wondering, where on earth has all this wisdom come from? So how do they respond to his teaching? We're told that they took offence at him. How could a carpenter say the things that he is saying and do the things that we've heard he's done? They believe the ordinary excludes the extraordinary. Brendan Byrne offers this reflection. The episode shows that the greatest enemy to faith can simply be familiarity, a refusal to believe that God's presence and prophetic agents of that presence could come to us in so familiar a form as the person next door. The Nazarenes had their own fixed ideas as to when and where and how the Messiah should come to Israel, and the one they knew as the carpenter, Mary's son, simply did not fill the bill. Byrne alerts us to an important lesson to be learned here. Progress in the spiritual life, growth in the Spirit, almost always shows itself in the ability to recognize God more and more in the ordinary, the everyday. G.K. Chesterton's observation is relevant here. The greatest of all illusions is the illusion of familiarity. If Bargil Pixner is correct, and the population of Nazareth was somewhere between 120 and 150 people, everyone would have known everyone else. So we can imagine them saying, "We've known him for over 30 years. We've watched him grow up and learn his craft from Joseph. He made furniture for us. He made the yokes for our oxen." New Testament scholar Tom Wright writes, "The kind of kingdom Jesus was talking about was not the sort of kingdom his contemporaries wanted to hear about. When the good folk of Nazareth had such an excuse for rejecting him, they took it with both hands. They didn't need to believe such a dangerous message. They could dismiss it as, 'Oh, he's just the local handyman.' The townsfolk of Nazareth refuse to listen. We see what we want to see. Here's an example of what I mean. A teacher set her class an assignment during an excursion to a national park. Each student was to make a list of various plants, insects, animals, and birds that they observed. After the students had been at this task for about an hour, the teacher called the class together and asked each of the students to read out the list of the flora and fauna they had observed. The teacher noticed that one of her students had only 2 words on his list: "No kangaroos." The teacher then said, "Okay, there were no kangaroos, but what else did you see?" The boy replied, "But I was only looking for kangaroos." That's tunnel vision. If you're so fixated on only seeing one thing, you are blind to everything else. Or we can be so wedded to tradition that we become inflexible. Father Gerald O'Collins, an Australian biblical scholar, tells the story about a friend of his who lived in an apartment block in New York. Very few of the apartments within the block had their own laundry, so the majority of residents had to rely on the common laundry, which was located in the basement. The janitor of the apartment block had his own set of inflexible rules. Every night he locked the laundry doors at 6 p.m, and he held the only key. That arrangement was highly inconvenient because most of the residents worked full-time and didn't arrive home until well after 6 p.m. That was the most convenient time for them to use the laundry facilities. When they approached the janitor about locking up the laundry a little later, he simply fastened a sign to the laundry door. "This laundry door closes at 6 p.m, because that's the way it has always been." This takes us back to the parable of the sower going out to sow in chapter 4 of Mark's Gospel. The sower casts seed in all directions, and we're invited to reflect upon what happens next. Some seeds fall on the edge of the path, and the birds come and eat them immediately. These seeds are metaphors for people who, like the people of Nazareth, have closed their minds and hearts, people who refuse to listen. You can see now why today's first reading from chapter 2 of the prophet Ezekiel was chosen to complement the gospel reading. The Lord sends the prophet to the Israelites, but he is told they are a rebellious people, defiant and obstinate. Luke's gospel gives us a fuller and more graphic account of Jesus' return to Nazareth. In Luke's Gospel, Jesus provokes such a hostile reaction that the townsfolk hustle him out of town, intending to throw him off a cliff. And so, we're told, he could work no miracle there. though he cured a few sick people by laying his hands on them. He was amazed at their lack of faith. The Jerusalem Bible translates the Greek word dunamis as miracle, but the New Revised Standard Version and the Revised New Jerusalem Bible are closer to the Greek by translating it as deed or work of power. The noun dunamis means physical power, force, might, strength, or powerful deeds. It is, of course, the Greek word from which we get our English word dynamite. And Jesus is amazed at their lack of faith, pistis in the Greek. Before we reflect on that word faith, let's look again at some of the ways that it has been used in Mark's Gospel so far. Keep in mind that in Greek the word faith is cognate with the verb to believe. In Greek the noun is pistis and the verb to believe is pisteuo. The first command that Jesus gives in Mark's Gospel is repent and believe in the Gospel. The verb to believe is pisteuete. That is the imperative plural of pisteuo. The faith that Jesus seeks obviously involves much more than just giving intellectual assent, and that becomes evident when Jesus cures a paralytic. When Jesus returns to Capernaum, word went round that he was in the house, and so many people came to hear him that there was no room inside, and a large crowd had gathered outside as well. Some people were bringing a paralytic to Jesus, but they couldn't get through the crowd. They then made their way onto the flat roof of the house and began stripping back the roof. When they had made a large enough opening, they lowered the paralytic through the roof. And Mark tells us that Jesus could see their faith. In chapter 4, we have the story of Jesus and the disciples crossing the Sea of Galilee late in the day. The weather turns nasty, and the boat is being pounded by wind and waves. The disciples are fearful of drowning, but Jesus is asleep in the stern of the boat. The disciples wake him up and say, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" Jesus wakes up, rebukes the wind, and says to the sea, "Quiet now, be still." Then the wind ceased, and there was dead calm. Jesus then says to the disciples, "Why are you so cowardly? Have you still no faith?" Last Sunday, however, we met two people who did have faith in Jesus. Jairus, president of the local synagogue, whose daughter was close to death, and a woman who had suffered from a hemorrhage for 12 years. Jesus tells the woman that her faith has restored her to health. And when word comes that Jairus' daughter has died, Jesus tells him not to be afraid and continue to have faith. He then raises the young girl from the dead. Now today, in chapter 6, we come back to a story about a lack of faith. So we have stories of faith and stories about a lack of faith. What is remarkable about today's Gospel is the way in which Mark shows how the powerful Son of God, who calms storms, expels demons, banishes diseases, and raises the dead, finally confronts a roadblock: the entrenched unbelief in his hometown. As we saw last Sunday, faith is the channel through which Jesus' power can work. Faith allows God's power to be effective in our world. So what do we mean by faith? Let's begin by asking the question, must we first understand something before we can believe it? St. Augustine, writing in the 5th century, said this: crede ut intelligas. Believe that you may understand. St. Anselm, writing several centuries later, agrees with St. Augustine. Anselm writes, Neque enim quaero intelligere ut credam, sed credo ut intelligam. I do not seek to understand so that I may believe. I believe that I may understand. Pope Benedict made a similar point during a Christmas homily in which he talked about the entrance to the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem. Here you can see a photograph of the church built over the traditional site of the birth of Jesus. The first church on this site was dedicated by Helena, the mother of the Roman Emperor Constantine, in May 339 AD. The entrance, circled, is very low. Most people have to bow low to gain entry. The original entrance to the church, which was much larger but is now walled up, is outlined here in red. A later, somewhat smaller entrance is white. And here once again is the much smaller present entrance. In his homily, Pope Benedict said this: Today, anyone wishing to enter the Church of Jesus' Nativity in Bethlehem will find that the doorway, 5.5 meters high, through which emperors and caliphs used to enter the building, is now largely walled up. Only a low opening of 1.5 meters has remained. The intention was probably to provide the church with better protection from attack, but above all, to prevent people from entering God's house on horseback. Anyone wishing to enter the place of Jesus' birth has to bend down. It seems to me that a deeper truth is revealed here, which should touch our hearts on this holy night. If we want to find the God who appeared as a child, then we must dismount from the high horse of our enlightened reason. In suggesting that we dismount from the high horse of our enlightened reason, Pope Benedict isn't talking about blind faith. He is making the point that so many things that we believe are not amenable to scientific proof or empirical verification. Some of our most profound experiences as human beings cannot be expressed in words, yet alone in scientific formulas. Psychiatrist Ian McGilchrist offers this observation: To be human, in my view, is to feel a deep gravitational pull towards something ineffable, that if we can just for once get beyond words and reasons, is a matter of experience, and to which we reach out silently, though not without misgivings, something outside our conceptual grasp, but nonetheless present to us through intimations that come to us from a whole range of unfathomable experiences we call spiritual. McGilchrist adds, Nothing is less true than that we understand something only when we express it in language. On the contrary, language at times places a barrier between us and understanding, substitutes a crabbed expression for a living reality, and pretends to explain it away. The difficulty lies not in finding the right words, the difficulty lies in there being no right words. A dramatic demonstration of the inadequacy of words to speak of the divine comes from the life of the Dominican friar St. Thomas Aquinas, one of the greatest theologians who has ever lived. His massive analytical work, the Summa Theologiae, is one of the most comprehensive accounts of the Christian faith ever written. By December 1273, Thomas had reached the middle of part 3 of the Summa, the place where he was writing about penance. But while he was celebrating Mass on December the 6th, the feast of St. Nicholas of Myra, Thomas had a mystical experience. Having written at a furious pace without ceasing for 35 years, he decided that he could not continue, and he never wrote another word. His secretary, Reginald of Pippino, urged him to resume his work. Aquinas replied, "I adjure you by the living Almighty God, and by the faith you have in our order, and by the love you bear me, that you never reveal in my lifetime what I am about to tell you. Everything that I have written seems to be like chaff compared to those things that I have seen and which have been revealed to me." A final reflection from philosopher Roger Scruton. Anybody who goes through life with open mind and heart will encounter moments that are saturated with meaning, but whose meaning cannot be put into words. These moments are precious to us. When they occur, it is as though on the winding, ill-lit stairway of our life we suddenly come across a window through which we catch sight of another and brighter world. There are many who dismiss this world as an unscientific fiction. I am not alone in thinking it real and important. Faith summons us to escape the prison of the rational mind, to dismount from the high horse of our enlightened reason, not because faith is a blind, unquestioning, naive, or superstitious acceptance of claims for which there is absolutely no evidence. Faith, rather, is about those experiences that cannot be put into words, not because we can't find the right words, but because there are no right words. Words are mere chaff. Faith, St. Paul tells the Romans, comes from hearing. Ultimately, though, it is not primarily about words, but about seeing. Aquinas wrote about oculata fides, a faith which sees. Faith is about a new way of seeing, a transformation of vision. In his encyclical Lumen Fidei, the Light of Faith, Pope Francis reminds us, faith's new way of seeing things is centered on Christ. Mark the Evangelist wants us to see who Christ is, and as we have seen, he invites us to respond to certain questions that his gospel subtly leaves hanging. Who can forgive sins but God alone? Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him? But sadly, like the townsfolk of Nazareth, we can refuse to listen and fail to see, becoming like seed that has fallen on infertile soil.